In Chapter 5, Pullen initiates a misleading, detailed discussion of his experience with rose gardening. But it turns out his thesis is that roses are, and have been for centuries, a kind of cultural artifact, imbued with meanings that have both endured and changed over time. For a plant, the rose carries an awful lot of cultural and political baggage. Finally, in the 20th century, becoming a thoroughgoing commodity. In a way, it becomes a symbol of symbols. Different eras of roses represent different strata of social class, represent different attitudes towards sexuality. Finally, the rose becomes a symbol for Pullen of how our very access to nature is overlain with cultural categories. Thoreau's idea of getting to the reality of nature, free of cultural signifiers, is cast into doubt. And once again, the result is that we are inevitably part of nature, and the nature-culture distinction, so far as it is a divide, is speciose. The practical lesson is that the habit of bluntly opposing nature and culture has only gotten us into trouble. And we won't work ourselves free of this trouble until we have developed a more complicated and subtle sense of how we fit into nature. The theme that the earth is a garden comes out in earnest in Chapter 6. It won't do to indulge an American strain of romantic thinking, perpetuated by Emerson and Thoreau, that weeds are on an equal moral footing with good garden citizens. The idea of a weed is not relativistic. It's not merely a matter of interpretation. Absolute weediness exists, argues Pullen. Weeds are in fact a product of history and culture, alien transplants that exploit niches we create for them. If left unchecked, they ruin our garden. Indeed, they ruin our relation to nature. Even the wilderness now requires our stewardship as gardeners. The ocean and atmosphere can no longer recover if we simply stop doing harm. Of course, forbearance is an aspect of gardening, but intervention, weeding, is required too. View the video Wolves in Yellowstone. I think this is an archetypal case of weeding in Pullen's extended sense, a case of gardening on the grand scale. Chapter 7 is optional reading, but it does shed more light on Pullen's views on the relation between culture and nature. Under cultivation is to forbear too much, to allow the naivete of the romantic view to undermine the health of nature. Overcultivation is to intervene too much, to quash the wildness of nature. Chapter 8 is also optional reading. However, in this chapter, Pullen reminds us in a colorful way that the global ecosystem is not a closed system. New energy is continually pouring down on Earth in the form of sunlight. Since our source of energy is unlimited, our environmental problems may have more to do with our technologies and habits and economic arrangements than with the planet's inherent limits or the burden of numbers. Chapter 9 is an expansive discussion of the history of Anglo-American connections between culture and ecology via a discussion of the meanings and practices surrounding trees. The history is cast as a series of tree metaphors. Each one is in its own way upholding a stark distinction between nature and culture. Pullen argues for the adoption of a new metaphor, one better suited to understanding nature and culture as part of one phenomenon, one better suited to the challenges we face. He argues that we understand trees as the lungs of the earth, a vital organ in a global system, more intricate and interdependent than we ever realized.